But what does it mean to be forsaken or God forsaken? Anybody have any clues?
To feel like you're abandoned or forgotten.
Ah, yes. So that's another synonym, another name for it would be abandoned, right? Just like all hope is gone, right? You don't, you have just don't have anything left, right? Well, in the book that we're reading, our author, Susan, pointed out the different styles that people wrote, the gospel writers were writing. She talked about the three being the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and how their stories kind of supported one another. And then she went on to tell us about how John was kind of the outlier. John kind of went straight to declaring that Jesus was God, right? Matthew took a lot of time talking about Jesus' birth and all, and so did Luke. They gave a lot of detail because that's what the synoptic gospels are. They talk a lot of detail, a lot of facts. But in the Gospel of John, he just goes right into it. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. And then he jumps to the 14th verse and he said, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us and all. So John doesn't waste any time. That's the way his style is and all. And he kind of comes across that. Well, our author, Susan, declares that all the gospel writers were writing for a specific audience that they were trying to reach. For instance, she said Matthew was a Jewish tax collector, so he believed, and the Jewish people believed in a Messiah, so he's writing about Jesus the Messiah, and he's appealing to that aspect of Jesus' life. Mark, on the other hand, was involved more with the Gentiles and taking the gospel to the Gentiles and all. So he was a little bit about inclusion, but he also understood that the Gentiles needed a savior, and so he focused a lot on that. As far as Luke was concerned, a lot more detail again. Luke's a physician. Doctors want to be able to save everybody, right? So Luke he includes everybody, right? His gospel, he says, is for what? The Jews, for the Gentiles, for the Samaritans, for everybody. But then John, as I said, John was just straight blunt to the point. He says, you know what, if you haven't been convinced by now, I'm not going to try to convince you. Jesus is God, period. In the story. And that's kind of the way he went at things and all. So he talks about it a little bit differently. And that was part of the introduction that we had for Susan. And then in week number 1 of our lesson, we talked about what Father forgive them for they don't know what they're doing, right? So we talked about that and said Jesus' words to his Father asking him to forgive his enemies was really a radical message of that day. That was kind of unheard of. People were not forgiving their enemies. In fact, they lived in kind of a vengeful world, right? The laws were basically, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. This is what they kind of concentrate on. This is what they were brought up to believe, and so that's where they were. But then comes Jesus, this young dynamic preacher, and he tells you what? Love your neighbor, love your enemies, love God with all your heart. So everything he talks about is based on love, is love-based. Well, that was radical for that day. And people really could not, some of them couldn't get along, get behind that message and all. There was one message in particular that Jesus, that comes to mind when, there was a law in the Romans could catch a Jewish citizen and then have them or enlist them to carry a burden for them, right? If they needed to move something someplace. And of course, the law said you could get them to do it for a mile. Well, Jesus said what? If they asked you to go a mile, go 2 miles. Well, that was really unpopular with the Jews, right? Because they hated the Romans. So you got Jesus telling them to do that, love your enemies, and even, tolerate them, do more, do for them, So that was really a radical message of the day.